Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Negotiating Your Next Job Offer. This session is brought to you by the American Diabetes Association's Focus on Fellows Early Career Webinar Series. Thank you to those that have attended our Focus on Fellows sessions last year. And for those of you that are new, we will be providing additional information on how you can join the Focus on Fellows program in order to get access to sessions like this. My name is Meltem Zeytinoglu, and I will be moderating today's program. To share a little bit about myself, I am an adult endocrinologist, and I currently work as an executive medical director at Eli Lilly in the Diabetes Global Medical Affairs Group. I was previously an adult endocrine program director and faculty at the University of Chicago, fellowship program director, and fellows and early career education remains something of the utmost importance to me. None of this would be possible without the guidance of the ADA's Early Career Advisory Group. We'd like to thank the members for all of their hard work, as well as our staff in helping to develop today's program. We're also very grateful for the support of the Leona M and Harry B. Helmsley Charitable Trust, who have made this meeting a possibility. Focus on Fellows offers a career development program for early career fellows who treat diabetes and its complications. We have several upcoming early career webinar sessions this spring, with our main one taking place on Friday, June 3rd at the ADA's 82nd Scientific Sessions in New Orleans. This event will be in person, so we hope that you can attend live. The Focus on Fellows program will also include sprint lectures as well as mini workshops, in addition to networking opportunities. Attendees participating in the Focus on Fellows program will be eligible for complimentary registration at the ADA's 82nd Scientific Sessions and a free ADA professional membership. If you're not already a part of our Focus on Fellows program, we encourage you to join. Visit the website, link in the chat, for more information and to apply. By joining the ADA Focus on Fellows program, you also become a professional member of the ADA. This free American Diabetes Association membership provides even more opportunities to network and grow professionally. The ADA memberships include a variety of professional member benefits, including meeting discounts, Women's Interprofessional Network, or the WIN ADA, interest groups, the Diabetes Pro Member Forum, access to diabetes care and other professional journals, members-only webinars, a members directory, access to the Standards of Medical Care in Diabetes, and the Diabetes Quarterly. As you can see, you'll have access to a lot of great resources on ADA as an ADA professional member. You'll receive information about membership following today's session. Now, I'm excited to transition to today's program. Please note that today's presentations will include a Q&A. If you have questions as we move through the presentation, please go ahead and type them in the Q&A box in your control panel. We'll answer as many questions as we can at the end of the session. It is now my privilege to introduce Alan DeBack. Mr. DeBack is an experienced career coach and learning consultant with over 20 years of experience. With career coaching experience in a variety of environments, he has helped clients gain clarity about their career pathways and how to pursue them. His training practice has focused on the area of communication and the areas of communication skills, management and leadership development, and career development. Alan has also developed and facilitated training in management skills, presentation skills, meeting facilitation, and business writing skills. His clients include associations, corporations, federal government agencies, and healthcare organizations. Alan possesses a liberal arts undergraduate degree from the State University of New York College at Geneseo, a master's degree in human resource development from the Rochester Institute of Technology, and a graduate certification in industrial labor relations from Cornell University. Thank you, Mr. DeBack, for joining us today, and I'll now turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Meltem, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Negotiating Your Next Job Offer. And thank you for that very nice introduction. So I'd want to share a little bit more background with you about myself and how I became interested in this whole topic about negotiating a job offer. I have been a career coach for many, many years. And as I've worked with my clients over the years, and I have gone through the job search process with them and have reached the point of getting offers, I've just become very, very interested in the process that they go through with prospective employers and how they arrive at a mutually agreeable place where there is an offer on the table that's really acceptable to both the applicant and the employer. And so I became really, really interested in this whole topic and have been doing a fair amount of research on it over the years. So I'm really happy to be able to share today with all of you some of what I've discovered and some of what I've learned about the whole negotiation process when you are going through a job search. So I'd like to start off by sharing with you the objectives for this afternoon, and the objectives look something like this. First of all, we'll have a conversation about why you should negotiate. I sometimes get pushback from people who say, oh, why should I negotiate? And so we'll talk about why and when it is appropriate to go through the negotiation process. We'll talk about exactly what is negotiable. We also are going to talk about something called market value, because one of the items that people very often negotiate when they're going through this process is salary. And in order to be able to negotiate salary effectively, you really need to know what you are worth for the type of job that you are applying for, as well as in the geographic area in which you live. So we'll talk fairly extensively about market value, and then we'll talk about some negotiation strategies. And finally, when you have reached agreement with the potential employer about what that package looks like, how you finalize that deal and how you go about making sure that you both have a clear understanding of what the package is and finalizing that deal. So that's where we're going to be headed. Those are our objectives for this afternoon. And to kick things off, I am curious about something. I always ask this question because I'm always curious about how people feel about the word negotiation and how people feel about negotiating. So I'd like to do a quick poll and find out how you all feel about negotiating. So if we could put the first poll up, and there it is. And I'd like you to vote and tell me how you feel about negotiating. And you'll see the choices range from just absolutely loving it to hating it, just wanting to avoid it at all costs, and a couple of choices in between. So if you could, please vote and let us know how you feel about negotiating. And let's see what the results look like. And this is very, very typical. Actually, usually I have someone who loves it. So this is kind of interesting. No one loves the challenge. And very often the third choice is the most preferred choice. I prefer to do it. I would prefer not to do it, but sometimes it's necessary. An awful lot of people feel that way. And before I really understood the negotiation process, I actually was the fourth choice. I hated it. It stressed me. I avoided it at all costs. Oh my goodness, I hated it so much. But I think some knowledge about the process really helps you move on beyond that. So this group seems to be very typical of a lot of the groups that I work with. So thank you for voting and giving me an idea of where you stand. So let's move into the content, and let's start off by talking a little bit about why you would want to negotiate. And so I'd like to first find out what your thoughts are about that. I'd like you to go to the chat box if you could. And I'd like you in the chat box to give me your thoughts about why should I negotiate? If you have a job offer on the table, why do you think you should negotiate? And let's see what your thoughts are about that. So you have an offer on the table in front of you, and why should you negotiate? I'll give you a moment to share your thoughts in the chat box. I always get an interesting range of answers here. And so as you are typing your thoughts in, one reason that I often get is that if I don't negotiate, if I don't stand up for myself, who's going to? And you know, that's a really good question. That's a really important thought, because if you don't stand up for yourself, if you aren't able to make that step and negotiate for yourself, who else is going to do it for you? So that's a very important thought. So we have one answer here, and thank you, Eliza. It is to be recognized for what you do. And I think that is a very good reason for negotiating, because certainly as you are going through this process and you are evaluating an offer that you have for a potential employer, you really do want to be recognized for the experience that you have. You want to be recognized for the degree that you've attained, all of the background that you bring to the table. And certainly you do want to be recognized for your background and your credentials. And Meltem, you said it very well. You've worked hard to earn those credentials, and it really is important to advocate for yourself. So thank you for that thought, Elise. And if anyone else has any thoughts, please be sure to type them in. We do have a relatively small group today, so I'd really encourage you to participate and share your thoughts. And yeah, I've also heard not wanting to be lowballed for sure. You want to be paid a fair salary. So that is definitely true. So thank you for your thoughts about why you should negotiate. And I want to share a few of my thoughts with you, because I think there are several reasons why it is really important for you to negotiate in many situations. And the first I already alluded to: you are your own best advocate. If you don't advocate for yourself, no one else is going to do so. And so in order to get the fair salary that you deserve, and in order to negotiate whatever other features you want to negotiate, you are definitely your own best advocate. And speaking of salary, very commonly that is what is negotiated. And it's not just the salary that you negotiate as a starting salary, but that really does impact your salary down the road. The salary at which you start impacts the salary raises that you get if you stay with the same employer. And it could impact, if you move to a different employer, it could certainly impact the salary that you are able to negotiate with a new employer. So it's not just a one-time thing if you're negotiating salary. It really can impact everything on down the road. The bottom line is, a really good reason for negotiating is you need to meet your bottom line needs. And so you really need to know what that bottom line is, what is the minimum, and really work from there. Because if you're not able to meet your bottom line needs, if you're not able to pay those basic bills, it's not going to end well. You're going to end up in financial difficulty. And if the salary you're being offered will not allow you to meet your bottom line needs, that certainly is a challenge. And finally, it's not just about salary. You really want to address all the components of an offer. And we'll talk about what some of those components are in a few minutes, but things like perhaps vacation time or work schedule, but other components that really are not directly related to salary. So there are a lot of good reasons why you should negotiate. That said, there are times when you probably should not negotiate. And so let's talk briefly about that. What are some scenarios where perhaps you should not negotiate? And there are a few times when it just doesn't make sense. Certainly, if you receive a fantastic offer with a wonderful salary and fantastic benefits, and it really just exceeds what you had expected, it's just a wonderful, wonderful offer, there probably is not a lot of reason to negotiate. You've gotten more than you expected, and let's not be greedy. If you have a really good offer, you're probably in good shape. It's probably a good idea not to. I had a client who went through the second scenario. Sometimes an employer will ask you fairly early in the process. They'll say something like, the range for this job is from X dollars to Y dollars. That is our specific range that we have to stick to. Before we go any further in this process, we don't want to waste your time. We don't want to waste ours. This is an agreeable range. And I had a client who got that question very early in the process, and the range was reasonable, so he said yes. And he ended up getting an offer later on that was at the higher end of the range. And he came back to me and he said, Alan, I want more money. I've decided that range is not appropriate and I want more money. And I really discouraged him from negotiating at that point, because in good faith earlier, he had told them the range they were discussing with him was, he had told them that was an acceptable range. They had given him an offer at the very upper end of that range, and now he was going to change the rules at the last minute. And that really could have been a reason why they might have retracted the offer, quite honestly. So I really discouraged him in that situation from negotiating. Sometimes things other than salary are more important. Perhaps a flexible work schedule is very important. Perhaps substantial vacation time is important. And so if the salary is not exactly what you wanted, but boy, the benefits package is fantastic and exceeds what you expected, that might also be a reason not to negotiate. And if you know that what they are offering is the best possible offer, and for example, a government agency, you may know the salary range for the job and what the upper end is, and you know that they cannot go further, then there certainly is not a good reason to negotiate. So there may be a few scenarios where you might want to not negotiate. I have a chart that I want to share with you that came from Donna Seville, who's the avid careerist. And she put together a wonderful chart several years back around when you should negotiate your job offer and when you shouldn't. And I like this chart because it visually gets you thinking about whether you should negotiate or not. And notice the one axis is you're in demand from 0 to 10, 0 being there's not much demand for your background and your specialty, 10 being yes, you're in great demand, there's a shortage of people who can do what you do. And then the bottom axis, you don't need the job, ranging from 0, I really need the job, I'm desperate, to 10, you know, I don't really need the job. If it doesn't come through, it's not the end of the world. And so this really gets you thinking, if you're not in great demand, suppose that the market is not great and you have a lot of competition and you really need the job, that's probably a time to just say yes. It's probably not a good strategy to negotiate. Maybe there is some demand for your specialty and you're not desperate for the job, but you do kind of need the job. You're kind of in the middle range. Certainly, you probably would want to negotiate. And this chart says based on internal equity. I would say negotiate based on your market value, which we'll talk about more in a bit. And boy, if you're in great demand and maybe you already have a great job and don't need a new one all that badly, then her terminology is play hardball. I'm not a fan of hardball as terminology, but certainly you can be a bit more assertive in your negotiation if you're in great demand and you really don't need the job. The ball is in your court, so to speak. And we're in a very unique job market right now where there are a lot of shortages and some of your specialties may be in great demand. So that may give you a little bit more leverage in terms of negotiating. So those are a few thoughts around should you negotiate, should you not negotiate. Let's move on and let's have a conversation around the actual negotiation process and what some of your ideas are around tips for negotiating. So once again, I'd like to open up the floor, and I'd like you to go to the chat box if you could. And I'm curious about what some of your tips and tricks are for effectively negotiating. Certainly, you probably have been through some kind of negotiation process, and you have and some things that don't work. So I'm curious about what are some of your tips for negotiating? If you were going to advise us, what are some of the pieces of advice that you would give us? So if you could just go to the chat box and share your thoughts. And we have one response so far, and that is to be respectful and kind. And I love that. I especially love the respectful part, because if you are not respectful, it is not going to be a sincere negotiation. So respectful and kind is great. Rebecca says, be honest with your needs and requests. And Rebecca, I also like the word honest very, very much, because if you are not honest, you really are not being straightforward in your negotiation, and it's not going to be a good negotiation for both you and the prospective employer. So I love those words so far, honest and respectful. I think those are fantastic words. Anyone else have any thoughts about this? I think those are two great responses. And if anyone has any other thoughts, please keep typing, please put them in, we'll come back to them. But I have a few tips that I want to share with you that I think are really important for a successful negotiation. So let's take a look at a few of my tips. And you'll see first on my list is be prepared. And by be prepared, I mean, know your market value, know what you are worth in the market. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Know what that bottom line is that we talked about a little bit earlier. And in terms of the rest of the package, the other components of the package, really know what your needs are and what it is that you want and need. Because you need to go into a negotiation process really knowing what the end result is, your ideal end result. And if you're not prepared and you don't know what that ideal end result is, the negotiation is going to meander all over the place. And it's probably not going to end as successfully for you as you would like. So really be prepared, know what's realistic, know what you want, and be prepared when you enter into that process. Second thing I would say is really look at the situation as a win-win. A lot of us hate negotiating, and I'm going to show you a slide around hating negotiating in just a moment. And it is because for a lot of us, the word negotiate has a negative connotation. And it's really important to think about this as a positive process, because think about it. When you move into a new job, when you start a new job, you want to be happy, you want to be satisfied, you want to feel like you're being paid fairly, that the work is good, you want to feel like you have a good benefits package. And by the same token, the employer wants you to be happy and feel good about the situation into which you are entering, because if you don't, chances are you're not going to be a fantastic employee. Earlier, Meltem said something about not wanting to be lowballed. If you feel like you've been lowballed and it's not a fair salary, you may not be as good as an employee, and the employer certainly wants you to be a fantastic employee. So it's important to really look at this as a win-win situation. Both sides are going to end up in a good place. And the final overall tip I have for you is be realistic. Do not expect things that are just crazy, off the wall. Do not expect a salary that is far in excess of your market value, but really be realistic in terms of what your expectations are and what your needs are. Because if you're not realistic, it's going to be very difficult to have a successful negotiation. So I do have people tell me they hate negotiating. One person in the poll at the very beginning this afternoon told us that they hated it. I used to hate it myself until I really understood the process. So good question here is, well, what if I do hate negotiating, or what if it's something that I really don't enjoy very much? And here are a few thoughts around that. Once again, the word negotiating has a very negative connotation in many people's minds. And the stereotypical example is going to buy a car. Many of us have been through that process. It's often not a pleasant process. You are not going to buy a used car when you enter into this negotiation process. This is a win-win process that we're trying to achieve. So first thing is some self-talk to try to get yourself out of that mindset of this is going to be this miserable process like I went through when I bought a car. Personally, the last time I bought a car, I ended up walking out of the dealership. It was not a pleasant process. This is very, very different. Once again, your future employer really wants you to be happy. And so it's not going to be this adversarial relationship when you go, like you experience when you go to buy a car, but it's again, we're striving for a win-win situation. So if you truly hate negotiating, as I used to, you really need to do some self-talk and really think about the fact that this is a different kind of negotiation that you are entering into versus the traditional kinds of negotiation that many of us have been familiar with. So some self-talk is really important here. Well, let's get into this and talk a little bit about exactly what might be negotiable. So I have another question for you. I'm curious about what your thoughts are around what parts of an offer could be negotiable. So once again, if you could go to the chat box, and I'd be really interested in your ideas about what parts of an offer could be negotiable. What are some of the things you might negotiate with a prospective employer? We all know salary is probably the top of the list. Traditionally, that's what we think about. So certainly salary is one of those things. But what in addition to salary might you be able to negotiate? So if you could go to the chat box and just share your thoughts about that. What else besides salary? And I will tell you, there are a laundry list of things. Yes, we're getting some great answers here. Yes, hours of work flexibility. And Rebecca also says flexible work schedule. Danielle, time split between research and clinical hours. Good, very good. Salary and hours. And so flexible work schedule, hours, that kind of thing, that is a very common part of the negotiation process. And especially in the last couple of years, as the job market has changed so dramatically, we have a bit more leverage in terms of negotiating something like hours and flexible work schedule and so forth. So there are some other components that I would assert to you are negotiable. And I'd like to share with you some of the things that I think you really can negotiate. So let's take a look at some of those components of the offer. So depending on the type of work you are doing, I have telecommuting here, and for some fields also home-based work has become much more important and has become much more negotiable in recent years. For the type of work that many of you are doing, clinical work, obviously that is probably not as feasible. But flexible work schedule, big deal for a lot of us. We have elderly parents, we have children who we are responsible for. That flexible work schedule becomes very important. Sometimes vacation is something that can be negotiated, particularly if you are coming from an environment, and I'll share an example of this with you in a few minutes, but if you're coming from an environment where you previously had more vacation than is being offered, that might be negotiable. If you're in high demand, you might be able to negotiate a signing bonus. I have a client who just negotiated a substantial signing bonus because he had a skill set that the employer really wanted. And so they gave him a one-time bonus to come on board. If your job offer is going to require a physical move, you may be able to get assistance with moving expenses. So if there's a move involved, that's often negotiable. And you may even be able to negotiate better insurance coverage if you have some unique needs for some reason that would require better than the basic insurance coverage that the employer is offering. So there are actually an awful lot of components in addition to salary that you can negotiate. And for some of us, those components are even more important than the salary. We may have situations in our personal lives that make those components even more important than salary. So there can be an awful lot on the table in terms of this process. So I'd like to pause here for a moment. We're about halfway through, and I'd like to find out what questions you have so far. We've covered quite a bit of ground. And so if you do have any questions, I'd love to spend just a couple of minutes and see what questions you have so far. If you want to put those into the chat box so we can all see them, I'd be happy to answer a couple of questions at this point. So let me give you just a moment to think about that. Oh, Rebecca actually asked the question. She said, how do you approach a topic such as moving expenses? So if a move is going to be involved, that is not unreasonable to have a conversation about. And I would raise it in terms of this is going to require a move on my part. I'm going to have to sell my house or break the lease on my apartment or whatever the case may be. And what assistance might you be able to give me with moving expenses? I would not say something like, will you pay for my move? Because they may only be able to partially assist you. But I would ask something like, because this is going to require a move, might you be able to provide, what sort of assistance could you provide with my moving expenses? We have another question. Can you negotiate a non-compete clause? Ooh, that is a tough one. That is a really tough one. I have actually faced that personally myself in a couple of scenarios. And that's a hard one to negotiate. I have not been very successful in that respect. If there is a non-compete clause, it is often because something has happened in the past that caused the employer to put that non-compete clause in the contract. And because of whatever that incident was in the past, they're very often not willing to negotiate something like that. I have not been successful. So I think that's a tough one. I think that's a very, very tough one to negotiate. Any other questions before we move ahead? Thank you for those two great questions so far. All right, let's move ahead then. And let's talk a little bit about salary, because that is the most common thing that most people want to negotiate. And I want to dig into this a little bit and talk about some strategies around salary negotiation, because it can be kind of tricky. So first of all, some overall tips around salary negotiation. If at all possible, I would let the employer raise the salary issue first. And you may be surprised to hear me say that, but it's very interesting. I have a very good friend who is a recruiting director for a major consulting firm in the Washington, D.C. area. And I once heard her make this statement, heard her talk about this, and her comment was, whoever raises salary first loses. And isn't that interesting? And I think her point was that if the applicant raises the salary issue first, it can send a signal that, oh, I'm kind of anxious about salary, and what is the salary range, and I'm very concerned about this. And it just could send a message to the employer that you're overly concerned about salary. And if they think you're overly concerned, they might try to lowball you. So if at all possible, I like to let the employer raise it first. They may ask you that question early on, and in that case, you'd need to deal with it. But if they do not bring it up, I would not bring it up. I would let them raise it first. if indeed they do raise that issue, a couple of really important things. You can see again on this slide, I've said be realistic, because you really need to be realistic. And to do that, you really need to know what you are worth in the marketplace. You really need to know what I call your market value. And that is, what is a job title like the one that I'm applying for worth in this geographic region, with the background and the skill sets and the credentials that I bring to the table. Really need to know that. And if they do ask you what kind of salary you're interested in, if at all possible, I would articulate a range rather than a specific salary. Because if you just say something like, I expect $150,000, that really narrows the ability on both sides to negotiate. And suppose that you really don't know what their range was, and perhaps they were thinking, oh, we're going to offer around 170. Well, suddenly, okay, we can lowball this person. And you might be over their potential range, their potential salary range. So if you know what your value is, if you know approximately what your market value is, you can articulate a range of maybe $10,000 or so, and that gives both sides a little bit more flexibility. So I think a range is much smarter as opposed to articulating a specific number. So here's the problem. How do I know what I'm worth? How do I know my market value? And let's talk about some strategies around knowing exactly what your market value is. And of course, the overall strategy is research. You really need to do some research to understand what your market value is. And there are a number of resources that you really can consult. There are professional associations, professional publications that do annual salary surveys of professionals working in their field. So there may be some data available from professional associations or publications. There are a number of online resources, actually quite a few online resources. My particular favorite is salary.com, and I'm going to show you some examples from salary.com in a moment. There is a website called dr-salaries.com that's pretty good, and payscale.com is also a fairly good one. There are others out there. You can do research and you can find other online resources, but these three are really pretty good. And you also can go to colleagues who are already working in your field, perhaps colleagues who are working in jobs that are very similar to the one that you are applying for. And certainly you don't want to go to them and say, so how much money are you making? That may be a little bit too personal, but you certainly could go to a colleague and say, you're working in a job very similar to the one that I've applied for, or the job that I've been offered. Can you give me an idea within your institution what is a range, a typical range for a job of that type? And they will very likely be able to help you out with some data. I do want to share some online resources with you, because there are some online resources that can be very helpful. And specifically, I want to start off by sharing a couple of examples with you from salary.com. And I really like salary.com because it allows you to put in some very, very specific job titles. It really drills down pretty deep to some very specific job titles. And it also allows you to put in specific geographic areas and find out the range for the geographic area in which you were going to be living. I happen to have two homes. I have a home in Fort Pierce, Florida, and I have a home in Fairfax County, Virginia. So I decided I would do a search in each. And the data was what I expected, and it was very interesting. And I did a search for a diabetes educator. I thought that was kind of an interesting title to do a search for. And I started out with Fort Pierce, Florida. And as you can see on the slide, what salary.com does is it gives you the median salary. And in Fort Pierce, Florida, you see it's about $76,500. And then it shows you the bell curve to the 10th percentile and to the 90th percentile. And so you can see a very high salary in Fort Pierce would be around 92,000. Low end would be around 62,000. And so this gives you some pretty interesting and pretty useful data about this specific job title, diabetes educator, and what the market value potentially is in Fort Pierce and St. Lucie County. So isn't that interesting? Then I thought, let's go to Fairfax. And so I did the same search for Fairfax, Virginia, and let's take a look at what I found in Fairfax. And Fairfax is a very different place. Fort Pierce and St. Lucie County are relatively rural. Fairfax is relatively urban. It's about 10 miles outside of Washington, D.C. And very dramatic difference in salary range, isn't there? In Fairfax, median income is almost 94,000. And you can see the range. You can see upper end 90th percentile is over 112, and 10th percentile is almost 76,000. So almost what the median was in Fort Pierce. And so this relates to a lot of things. There are a lot of major medical facilities and major universities in Fairfax. Cost of living in Fairfax is much, much higher than it is in Fort Pierce. And so because of that salary, because of those factors and others, salary range is substantially higher. So I thought that was some really interesting data. And one of the nice things about salary.com, it really allows you to dig down in terms of geographic area. A couple of other things I want to show you around salary. I did some research with a site called Medscape, and this data is from 2020. So this data is a couple of years old, but Medscape answered the question, how much do endocrinologists earn, by showing the average for diabetes and endocrinology as it compares to other medical or other specialties. And so you can see, and I don't think this is a surprise to anybody, there are other specialties that are far higher. There was another interesting piece of data, and kind of a shocking piece of data to me, that I found on this website. It also showed how much men earn versus women as endocrinologists. And there, at least in 2020, there was a fairly major pay gap. And I kind of expected that, because I know there is still a gender gap overall in most professions between what men and women make. But I just thought this was kind of interesting data as it relates to endocrinologists. So that was another site. And then some of you may potentially at some point be looking at a government agency. You may be looking at a medical facility that is run by state, federal, or local government. You may be looking at a public university that is run by a state, or probably a state government. And so the question comes up of, how do I negotiate salary with a government agency? Because that is a little bit different animal. And I, in fact, have been through that process. I did work for a county level agency for several years. And it's a little bit different. You need to understand the limitations that the agency faces. You need to, if you are going to try to negotiate, particularly with a government agency, you'd better have some data to support that negotiation. And once again, really need to be realistic. And with a government agency, usually something is published around salary ranges at various levels. And so you probably can do some research and find out what the limitations are, so that you can be realistic. And I did a little bit of research, and I decided to focus in on the VA, the Veterans Administration, Department of Veterans Affairs. And I found this data, which was effective as of January 2nd of this year. And it shows clinical specialties at 3 different tiers, as you can see, ranging from tier 1, which would be a staff physician, up through tier 3, which would be a manager whose scope is fairly wide. And you can see the minimum and the maximum in each of those tiers. One thing I think is very interesting here is that for some reason, the minimum in tier 2 is lower than the minimum in tier 1. I don't quite understand that. That's kind of strange. But you can see that one of the covered clinical specialties is endocrinology. So if I were applying for a job with the VA, with the Department of Veterans Affairs, I would be able to identify what tier that job was in, tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3, and I would understand very quickly the minimum and the maximum, and that would really help me in my negotiation because I would have a better idea of what was realistic. I will tell you again, you'd better have some evidence, some data, if you are going to try to negotiate a higher salary with a government agency. I went through that experience several years ago when I was hired by a government agency and I was moving from the private sector and got an offer that was actually lower than my current salary. But for a number of reasons, the diversity of the experience and so forth, I really wanted to make the move. And so I approached the person who was going to be my supervisor and with whom I had developed a pretty good rapport, and said, I really am interested in this position, but the salary is actually less than I'm currently making. Is there some negotiation, some leverage available here? And I actually had a pay stub to be able to show him that indeed I was making more. And to make a long story short, he was able to negotiate a higher starting salary based on my previous salary. So I had some data to support that. But you should be able to research and find out what the ranges are for a government agency. So other components. What are some of the other components you might be able to negotiate? And here you see a list of some of them. Most of these are self-explanatory. Date for first performance review might be something to negotiate if you are not able to negotiate salary. If for some reason you can't get to the level that you wanted to, you might be able to negotiate a first performance review after 6 months rather than a year, and the opportunity for a raise might come about after 6 months rather than waiting for an entire year. So if there are salary issues, an earlier performance review may help with that. And I think everything else here is pretty self-explanatory. So one question I often get is, how will employers respond if I try to negotiate? And what do you think? I have another quick poll here, if we could put that up. How do you think employers will respond if you try to negotiate? And actually, we're going to go to the next poll. I skipped over one. And I don't think we have that poll available, so we'll just keep going. So here's the deal. Most employers do expect that there will be negotiation. And it's very, very common, especially in this day and age when the job market is so strong for job hunters. Most employers expect it. Understand that there is a risk. You may encounter the employer who just does not want to do it. They feel like the offer is fair. They're not willing to. That's fine. So there is a risk, but I will tell you right now in this particular job market, the risk is pretty minimal. And finally, certainly if you stay positive, it's more likely that the employer is going to stay positive. So the next question that comes up is, how assertive should I be? So let's take a look at some ideas around that. How assertive should I be? And here's some thoughts around that. And once again, most of what you see here, I think, is common sense. I think based on what we've talked about so far, makes a lot of sense. However, the last bullet, do not make ultimatums. And I had a client recently who did that. He was not happy with the salary he was being offered. He went to a prospective employer, and rather than to try to negotiate, he simply said, I have to have X as a salary, and that's it. Either that or I walk away. And the employer felt as if he was being perhaps a little bit too aggressive. And guess what? The employer walked away. They said, well, sorry, we're not going to be able to do that. And they revoked the offer. And so I would really advise about not making ultimatums. So, once again, you need to make your case, but you need to do it in a very likable, very positive way. So finally, let's suppose you've gone through the entire negotiation process and you have reached a conclusion that is acceptable to both you and the employer. Final question around this is, how do I wrap up the deal? How do on both sides, we wrap this up and get me started in my new position? So first of all, the first bullet is incredibly important. If there is anything that is not clear, if there is anything that you do not understand, please ask questions. Make sure you understand the offer and all of the components of the offer, because in order to accept something, you really need to thoroughly understand it. And sometimes there are questions around something like a non-compete, or there could be questions around some kind of complicated insurance policy. Really important to understand everything. I recommend not accepting on the spot. Even if it is a terrific offer, I tend to want to have at least 24 hours to just kind of think it through. If you have a spouse or a significant other with whom you need to discuss the offer, that's a great out for having to have at least a 24-hour time period to discuss it with your spouse or significant other. But I think it's a good idea just to have a little time to think it through, even if on the surface it sounds fantastic. And finally, get it in writing, either in writing through an email or in writing through a formal offer letter, and respond in writing accepting the offer. And a very quick story around that. I have a friend who several years ago, we worked for the same employer. She decided to leave and she accepted an offer with another employer. And in the process of negotiating, she negotiated more vacation time, but it was never put in writing. She just negotiated with the recruiter, and the recruiter said, yes, you can have 4 weeks instead of 3 weeks. Nothing was ever put into writing. She started her new job, and by the time she started, the recruiter with whom she had negotiated had left the company, gone to another company, started another job. And in passing, in the first couple of days, she mentioned something to her supervisor who knew nothing about 4 weeks instead of 3 weeks. And to the company's benefit, they were very, very ethical. They actually reached out to the recruiter who had left and said, did you offer Maria 4 weeks instead of 3 weeks? And the recruiter said, yes, I did. And the company was very ethical and honored what the recruiter had offered. But had they not been able to reach that recruiter, there was absolutely nothing anywhere that said she was to get 4 weeks instead of 3 weeks of vacation. So get every component of the offer in writing and respond in writing so that everyone is on the same page. And you're ready to start, the company is ready for you to start in a really positive way. So that's an overview of the whole process from start to finish. And we do have a few minutes left here at the end of the hour. So I'd love to entertain any additional questions anyone has. What questions do you have that you would like to share? And feel free to put them in the chat box. And I'll ask our moderator, have you gotten any questions during the course of the seminar?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for a wonderful presentation. And I think that as we think through some of the questions, one of the questions that I get asked often is when we look at these sort of helpful tools like salary.com, and we get these ranges, often they, I found in medicine that they tend to reflect the median, which in certain high market areas like New York City, Chicago, or in academic positions are very, very different. So for example, the median endocrinologist salary for an academic endocrinologist in Chicago is significantly lower, actually, despite being a higher cost of living location. So the recommendation then is to speak locally and talk to people, as you wonderfully alluded to. But I find that fellows and mentees, they struggle to ask that. So what advice do you have for approaching that sort of question?
And you're absolutely right. That is not a comfortable question. Money and salary are never comfortable questions. So I think approaching it in a more general manner is easier than being very specific. And so, as I said earlier, I would not go to someone and ask them, how much money do you make? Because that is just not comfortable and way too targeted. But I think if you approach it from a broader perspective, so you're working in an institution in which I am interested, or you're working in a position that's very similar to one that I've been offered, can you give me an idea of what you think a range might be? I think that's much more comfortable. So just phrasing it in more general terms, because you're right, salary is not comfortable.
Yes, it is very challenging. And one of the things that I found really helpful was asking peers who are maybe just a little bit above, say you're a fellow, the fellows who graduated in the 1 to 2 years before you, getting a sense of that may be more comfortable than asking, mentors. But as mentors, it's also our job. I'm actually very upfront about my salary with my trainees and former trainees, because I think we don't get this information, and it's important for us to have more transparency. So thank you so much. And I see in the comments, we have a specific question. What if the contract says you have to pay for something like Medicaid audits? Can you negotiate getting this out of the contract?
Wow, I am not sure of the answer to that, to be honest. That is very, very specific. My gut, and I'll just give you my reaction. I don't know the answer. I have to be very honest. That's a very specific question. And I think someone who is in the field would be better qualified than me to answer it. My initial reaction is most things are negotiable. And so potentially that could be, but I'm not sure. I don't know.
And in my experience in endocrinology and even in internal medicine, sort of this is a very, I think, specific one. It's not one that I'm used to seeing often. And then I guess and I know we're running short on time, so I really want to encourage our participants, if you have any last burning questions, to ask. But one of the other things is your recommendations on contract lawyers to review. And what thoughts you have on that as part of the experience.
Thank you for that. I have mixed reactions to that. I have found in my own experience that typically I was able to understand the components of the contract well enough that I felt comfortable. That said, if it is a really complex contract and you don't feel like you understand the components, I think going to a contract lawyer is a great strategy. So it just depends on your comfort level with your understanding of the contract.
That's very helpful. Thank you. And I think this is where those sorts of things come in, is similarly with, not very complicated non-compete clauses and things like that. I think that's really useful advice. Well, we want to thank you so much. I hope that, that those of you who were able to participate with us are a little bit less scared today about the process. I think remember that my advice and my experience, having just recently changed positions sessions is being friendly and being, advocating for yourself as a number one, but not approaching it in a hostile way. And I think that the experience tends to be favorable in that case. So thank you so much, Alan, for this wonderful presentation. I want to also thank the Leona M and Harry B. Helmsley Charitable Trust, and each of you for taking a little bit of time out of your afternoon to join us today. We'll be hosting another Focus on Fellow Early Career webinar on May 10th, so please look out for an email about the upcoming programs and information about our in-person program at Scientific Sessions. We look forward to seeing you in New Orleans at the ADA's 82nd sessions, and thank you again. We'll hope to see you at our next program soon.